all going to be very eager to hear it. Thank you, Charlene, for getting that going. Perfect. So, Allison, over to you.
Okay, here we go. And just give me a second here. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you guys about this project management essentials. And so project management is a very large topic, and I'm really just going to be scratching the surface a little bit to give you, a sense of what it is and how you can use pieces of it in your own life, professionally or personally. I've been a project manager for 15 years. I got my PMP in 2019. And I've been doing presentations like this for trainees and early investigators. This is probably my fifth or sixth presentation to various groups. It's more and more being requested. So hopefully you guys can see my screen okay. Let me know if not. So why does this matter? So as I just said, this is my fourth or fifth presentation to groups like yours about project management. So it's important because you all have projects in your life, probably more than you even realize. Some of you may be a project manager, and you also may have a project manager that you work with, or you may be needing to hire a project manager in the near future. So it's important to understand the skill set needed. And I want to point out this is an interesting tidbit that I recently became aware of. But in 2016, there was a public law passed that required all federal agencies to they have to consider best practices in project management and program management to prevent unfinished business, fraud, waste, and abuse, and improve consistency and communication across federal agencies. So I've seen more and more federal grants coming through the university requiring some sort of information or tutorial or requirements to talk about project management or to be familiar with project management. And finally, complex global issues can be solved using project management. So the objectives for today, I'm hoping to just define a project and project management. We all throw around kind of buzzwords all the time. And so just to be clear what we're talking about, define that, and also provide a common vocabulary around project management so that we can discuss it in terms of how it applies in your academic work or even in just everyday projects. And finally, I'll review a top 10 list of project management tips, tools, and techniques, and I'll provide you some resource information for those of you who want more. So my definitions come from a guide to the project management body of knowledge, also known as the PMBOK guide. It's in its 7th edition. It was recently updated in 2020. Their definition of project has changed just a little bit since I took since I got my certification. It is defined as a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. And then a project manager is the person assigned by the performing organization to lead the team that's responsible for achieving the project objectives. And then, of course, your project team are the individuals that perform the work on the project. And in case none of you are aware or familiar, PMI is the Project Management Institute. It's the governing body that certifies project manager professionals and offers resources to educate and certify. And as I mentioned, it's in the 7th edition, and it's a collection of best practices, definitions, terminologies, and guidelines for project managers across all disciplines. So I've got two examples here, two pictures here. One is a picture of a house renovation. One is a picture of manufacturing a product. So which one of these is a project? I'm gonna throw that out there to you guys. You can respond in chat, or if you want to come off your microphone. Come off
I mean,
mute.
I would say that they're both projects. They may have different scales to them, and they have obviously different constituent people who care about the completion of the project, but I think they probably both are projects.
Okay, thank you, Julia. Anybody else?
I think it's just the house renovation because the project, at least maybe it's just the assembly line imagery, but it makes me think it's ongoing and not temporarily bound versus a house renovation, which would be.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jonah. Yeah, and I can see both sides, because manufacturing a product could have a project involved, but for the most part, a house renovation is going to be a unique product or a unique result. It's going to have, it has a start and an end time, and it meets that definition of project. Versus you're manufacturing a product. This individual on this picture is showing he's doing the same activity over and over. So that's usually referred to as operations. So examples of operations would be accounts payable, procurement, service delivery, and customer service. You kind of just routinely do them. But the important thing to point out is that projects also include operations. And so in academic research, of course, that is project management. So all of your research that gets funded, and even research that is not funded, those get done through projects. So just take a couple of minutes in your head and think about what projects you are part of and what is your role on those projects. So if you could take just a minute or two and just think about that for just a second, and then we'll go through these next slides. Okay, I appreciate that. I had to check on my puppy, who has been asleep this whole time and fine, and decides now to wake up and tear up a plastic bag. So I'm back. Hopefully he will be entertained for a few more minutes so I can get through this. Okay, so I want to talk to you about the principles. So these are going to guide what project managers should do. There are 12 principles. This is new. This was in the recent edition of the PMBOK guide. I'm not going to read through all of these. I'll just point out a few of them and then see if you guys have any comments. So effectively engage with stakeholders, tailor based on context, optimizing risk responses, and enabling change to achieve the envisioned future state. Does anyone have any comments about these 12 principles that you would like to share?
Boy, do I need this lecture and these slides, because I am trying to figure out what a project manager is actually supposed to do, both real time and for a grant submission. And always have had someone else doing that development for me. So thank you. This is very timely.
Oh, good. Okay, so I'm gonna talk a little bit now about the performance domains. Again, this is all in the PMBOK guide for those of you who are curious. So these are covering what you need to know. So a domain is, a group of related activities that are critical for the effective delivery of the project outcomes. So they're interactive, interrelated, and interdependent areas of focus, and they form a unified whole. I like to call these all the balls that project managers must keep in the air at all times, because you kind of have to deal with these throughout the course of the project. Some of them more at the beginning, some more in the middle, and some at the end, but definitely it is an ongoing cycle. And the PMBOK guide has this nice sketch that really kind of shows the principles of project management, really guide the behavior that helps you keep all of those balls in the air. So any comments about how the principles and the domains work together? Oh, and Charlene does point out there's a great video that gives an overview of the new PMBOK guide that you guys can watch. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the tools, techniques, and templates for PM. And this is the how of project management. So the first one is engage your stakeholders and your team. So identify all stakeholders of your project, internal and external. As soon as you get a project, that's one of the first most important pieces that you can do, is to make a list of everybody that has a stake in your project and where are they located. You also want to do something similar with your project team, and identify the roles and responsibilities of who's doing which part of the work. It's really important not to have ambiguity, to be really clear about that. And you want to check in with these people regularly. And maybe this goes without saying, but showing team members and your stakeholders appreciation, gratitude, and offering support is really critical in keeping kind of morale up and keeping the project going along. Number 2 is master your people skills. So Gandhi says, I suppose leadership at one time meant muscles, but today it means getting along with people. So you really can never underestimate the importance of people skills. We often hire people based on their technical expertise or their certifications, but in my experience, people skills are probably the most important, but it's really hard to measure that. Project managers, it's just really a fundamental part of their skill set. They should know how to negotiate and deal with conflict, and creative problem solving and team building are really critical skills. And you'll have to use them throughout your project. Number 3, chunk out the work. That's what I'm calling it here. The PMBOK guide likes to use a fancy term called the work breakdown structure. But essentially, once you get a project, you've identified a project, you'll want to chunk it into manageable pieces. So I'm using that example of renovating your house because that happens to be a project that I'm experiencing now in my personal life. So if you're going to renovate the second floor of your house, you want to chunk it into each of the rooms that you're going to renovate. You'll want to identify some subtasks underneath that, and then eventually a work package. Once you get to that work package level in blue, those are some examples there. That's when you can say this person is going to do this, and you can create a schedule. But first you have to really just kind of piece out the work. And then once you've got your chunks figured out and your work packages figured out, you want to organize the work. This picture here is just an example of what many of you have probably seen before as a Gantt chart. It's just a way of sketching out a schedule of the work and identifying what parts of the project have to happen first, second, third, what parts of the project can happen in parallel to other parts, and what pieces of the project can happen only after something else happens. So for example, you can't paint the house before you put the drywall in. So that's really important for identifying the schedule. Number 5, software is your friend. So depending on the complexity of the project that you're dealing with, there's some good products out there. Office 365 has Planner, which is free. And then there's also Microsoft Project. That's usually an additional purchase. And there's some free versions of Asana, Smartsheet, and then just Excel, Word, and a notepad and pencil, depending on how complex your project is. The most important thing is that you will use whichever digital software system you decide to use. Make sure everyone on your team knows how to use it and that it's user friendly. Otherwise, it will be a waste of everyone's time. So 6, anticipate the unexpected. So this is otherwise known as risk management. So for every project, no matter how big or small, a project manager should be assessing some sort of risk. And risk can be positive and negative. A risk could be that your funder says, hey, I've got $10,000 extra dollars. What are you going to do with it? And it also could be you're about to be out of money. So you just have to develop ways to identify the risk and assess them, and then come up with some mitigation plans to handle them. Number 7, make iterative and incremental changes as needed. So this is often referred to as the agile approach to project management. So instead of using that buzzword, I like to just call it an iterative and incremental approach to project management. I think it's a much more likely scenario that this is how real life works. Things change all the time. So an example would be that I'm going to gather the requirements for my house renovation. I have the requirements. I know which rooms I'm going to renovate, and there's certain things I want in each of those rooms. I'm going to give that information to the designer. She's going to say, well, I like this, but I don't like that. And so then she'll go back and make adjustments, and we might go around the circle 2 or 3 times before she's finally giving her design to the contractor. This happens in projects all the time. Another example would be if you're developing a survey. You might want to pilot test that survey, or you might want to get feedback from certain expertise and just go around and around in the circle a little bit before you're finally sending it out to parents to take. Number 8, plan and run efficient meetings. So meetings are typically the main way you communicate progress on your project. I think it's really important to think about how you use meetings and make sure that you use the time wisely. Some key tips would be just making sure you have an agenda for each meeting, making sure you start and end on time, that you're only inviting relevant people. For example, in our projects, we have analysts on all of our project teams, but we only rarely use the analysts. So they don't come to our weekly progress meetings, but they come when we ask them to come if the topic is relevant. So think about having just relevant people there. And at the meeting, make sure you stay on the agenda as much as possible, assign and list action items, take your notes and send them back out to the group. And anything that comes up that seems tangential, put it in a parking lot and come back to it at another meeting at another time. Number 9, be adaptable. So Charles Darwin said, it's not the strongest, but the most adaptable that survive. And I think that's very true for project managers, because projects change all the time. And so you really have to have an attitude of being adaptable. And lastly, my last tip is Winston Churchill says, attitude is a little thing that makes a big difference. So, apologize for the dog barking. There was a research study done a few years ago where they looked at the characteristics of the top 2% project managers, and having a positive attitude was one of the most common traits among those top performers. So I think having a good attitude is good. It's good in project management, but also a good message for life. Sorry about that. This is a list of resources for anyone who's interested. The University of Colorado has a few free courses. I know a lot of you are not with the University of Colorado. So these may not apply to you as being free, but you may have some version of LinkedIn Learning through your academic institution. So again, some of those may not apply. I also have some templates available upon request. If any of you are interested, I can get those to Jonah or Charlene. I didn't provide those today, but I can certainly, I'm happy to share those out. And I'm going to put this on mute and open this up for questions. Go ahead if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, great. I think I see Marie's hand up. So Marie, go ahead.
Yeah, my biggest struggle, I think, is, and you would know this, the answer to this, how important is it that a project manager have a working knowledge of the subject for which the project is being launched or the grant is being written? So for example, you know, I do transfusion medicine in patients who are bleeding to death. What kind of background should a project manager have, or is it not really all that important?
I think that's a great question. Very good question. I came into, I mean, I can share my background, and I'm sure Charlene and maybe others have other examples. I mean, I was in public health. I have my MPH. I also have my social work degree. I was not trained a project manager, but I became one. So I knew the content, or, you know, I was in healthcare, but I was not an expert in vaccine delivery, which is what I was originally hired to do. So looking back now, I mean, I think it sort of depends, but I think the project management skills probably are more important than the content, because there's probably somebody else that knows the subject and can be that expert. But you really need somebody who can organize the work. And the people skills and the communication piece is really huge. I don't know if others have a different idea about that, but that would be my opinion.
Kind of a follow-up question to that. Just kind of from what you know about like the work that BEI is doing in this program, working with family and patient partners, do you think that there are any like considerations to make like given like that dynamic and stuff like that you would maybe approach differently? Because it's such a kind of it is a very relatively new and different approach to research from a lot of perspectives. And so for this kind of project, like, I guess what I'm asking, like, how do you deal with a project that is kind of breaking precedent with past projects?
I don't know that I can answer that. Maybe I'm not understanding the question completely.
It might not be a great question. I didn't have it fully formed in my head. I'll think about it a little bit and follow up.
I mean, I think every project a project manager takes on is its own, it's going to have its own deal. I know for me, if I work with 5 different PIs and I manage different projects, the people involved and the team involved, you know, play a big role on like how that project goes, right? Because there's different personalities, different politics, different, you know, all kinds of things going on. So, you know, they are truly unique. And so I don't know if there really isn't such a thing as like boilerplate project management. There's tips, tools, and techniques that you can use. And some of them I never use. And then some of them I have to use every single one because it's a very complex project and there's so many people involved. It really just kind of depends. And the more experience you have, the better you're able to gauge what's a waste of my time to put this together or go through this template or whatever, and what really would be valuable, because this team doesn't really understand the role in the project. I don't know if that
As
helps.
a follow-up question to Jonah's, then with that answer, are there particular aspects of the project management process or particular approaches that you might take if you are managing a project where the people doing the project come from a variety of different backgrounds? So like in this example, it's people who are trained in medicine and kind of come to largely clinical research, but then it's also a family or a patient partner who really is coming from a lived experience, and who may or may not have any formal, teaching or experience with the research process, and kind of how do you bridge those very different but complementary areas of expertise so that the project runs smoothly?
Okay, yeah, I mean, I would say two things. One, just off the top of my head, I would say the stakeholder process. So really identifying all your stakeholders. If one's a parent, one's a clinician, identifying all your stakeholders, and then really identifying how best to communicate with them and what information they're going to need to know. Because you might have to communicate with clinicians in a very different way and engage clinicians in a different way than you would a parent who doesn't know anything about research. And so really getting clear on, what materials and what information for each of those sets of players or stakeholders, and, get buy-in, get feedback, find out what they need to know. It's the communication piece that really is, I think, the thread that weaves through it all is really just communication. And it's okay to say you don't know and you need feedback from the groups that maybe you're unsure about, I think. So I would say stakeholder engagement, and your project team engagement, and then also just communication. And there's a whole slew of resources about communication, like how to communicate, what types of things to communicate. I think it's really important. Any other questions? These are all really great.
Do you have do you have a favorite project manager tool that you use?
Well, I will admit that and maybe this I'm sure maybe ages me a bit, but I still have my paper planner that I use to kind of at a high level write out all my project and kind of the main to-dos each week. And then for the projects that are a little more complex, and maybe I have to go back and forth with another project coordinator or the PI, I use Planner, and I use it in kind of a Kanban, which I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but I use that to list out, an activity of all the work. And then each week we call them kind of sprints for, this is the work we're going to do in this week. And we kind of hold each other accountable with that. And Planner is free. And so that's been a pretty easy thing for us to do. But again, I've got stuff written just in my notebook too. And I use email a lot because what I find is there are PIs that are just really not ever going to use software. And so if it's easy and people respond to an email with your action item list of like, here's what we decided today, and just blast it out like that and just check in with people. I think you just have to use whatever works. It's about being adaptable to your, the people that are on your team and your stakeholders.
Also, pen and paper is timeless.
Yes.
There's no age to it.
I had a question in the chat that when I Googled Microsoft Planner, it kind of put me into my Teams. So is that the same thing, or?
They're different, but you can add it in as a I forget how Teams refers to it, as like an app
Oh,
in
okay.
Teams, which is really convenient. I use Teams all the time.
Yeah.
And so there are some teams where I have it just tagged right into the team as a it looks kind of like a tab under the general. But if you go like to your webmail, at least on mine, there's the little waffle, for lack of a better word, the waffle icon in the in the top left corner. If you click on that, it'll show you all the apps that you have through Office 365, and Planner is one of the apps, and that would just take you to the online kind of version.
So one thing I wanted to say about the new 7th edition PMBOK guide, in the past, I think so, Allison, correct me if I'm misstating this, but it was somewhat prescriptive. You know, there was like initiation. Here's how you initiate your project. Here's how you monitor it. Here's how you evaluate it. Where this new edition is more about the principles, and so you can really you can really structure your project management to the things that are unique about the project that you're working on. And every project is unique because not only is the subject matter unique, but usually the people that are on your team are different. And so there's different ways to communicate with them. There's different personalities. There's different roles that people are going to play based on their interests and expertise and so on. But across the principles, I think, of this guide is the ability to really think through certain things that are universal. So for example, like Allison said, it's really important to understand what people's roles are. So even though the roles may change from project to project, it's important that you understand that, and that your team members understand what their roles are. And so this helps you structure this, even, you know, sort of create a template for yourself about the things that you need to pay attention to as you're structuring your project and so on. The other thing I want to say about this is that it's interesting because, you know, going through a PhD program, for example, a PhD program is meant to teach you how to do research, and in many master's programs, you're also doing capstones, which are research projects. And I don't know about med school, but I suspect that, you know, nowadays you have to do some research. But in all of those programs, including PhD programs, which are specifically designed to teach you how to do this, you never learn project management, ever. And so, you know, take this presentation as that extra piece that most likely you did not or will not learn in a master's program, an MD program, or a PhD program, because it will make your life so much easier. I can't even tell you.
Very, very true. Thank you so much, Charlene. You know, as you go through your career, you know, and you'll all, you know, go through different stages of your career, the demands, you know, just sometimes increase, and the complexity of the projects increase as well. And so these skills are just absolutely important, are so critical. And I wish I had learned them, you know, in my training. So yes, I think that you'll find that incorporating them will make a big difference. So. Any other questions, comments while we still have Allison? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Allison. That was just fantastic. You know, you're helping helping these folks, you know, helping all of us really, you know, become much more productive and you know, efficient at what we do. So thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I'll send Charlene some additional resources and links. for those interested.
Great. Thank you
Awesome.
so much.
You guys, gotta go
Great.
take care of puppy now.
Yes, important. All right,
Bye.
bye-bye. Okay, so for everybody else, we're going to launch into our next